James, you're up next with a question from Gamby in Bristol. And actually, it's about large events that are happening. It is summertime, things get planned outdoors. Foo Fighters due to be playing at Anfield, Harry Styles at Wembley tomorrow again. So when the forecast has got such high temperatures, what is the best ways to stay safe, firstly, but also at what point does that become a significant risk?
Yeah, I mean, there is something different when it comes to those big mass events where there's crowds. And it's largely because our behavior changes when we're there. Because just imagine if you have queued for ages and you've managed to get a really nice view of the stage at a big concert, you're not going to want to have to leave that spot and go to the toilet and lose your space. So what you often see is that people end up drinking less, so it increases their risk of dehydration. And you also see people turning to alcohol, and sometimes you get recreational drug use, or can increase the risk of heat exhaustion and potentially heat stroke. If it's in the middle of the day, then you could be standing in the baking sun as well. So you have to be really mindful of the heat and the temperature and the sun in those conditions. And in all honesty, it's much of the advice that you have to follow, but you have to be particularly attuned to it in those big crowded environments, because it's not quite as easy as just nipping inside the house or somewhere to cool off. So it is things like making sure you have a wide brimmed hat to keep the sun off of your head. Make sure you've got plenty of sun cream on the go, because I don't know if you know this, Priya, but actually if you get sunburnt, it actually inhibits your body's ability to sweat, and that is one of the main ways that you cool off. So make sure you've got your sun cream on, because not only will it protect you from the sun, it's also going to protect you from overheating. And make sure you've got plenty of water to keep hydrated too. So it's all the sensible advice, but you have to be particularly alert to it in those times when you might not want to.
James, I didn't know that, and I also very highly rate your props cupboard. So good planning, thank you.
Why, thank you for it.
And I am going to be asking James for some top tips on staying cool, and as I was saying, hopefully some better sleep. So if you can get thinking about that, we'll get onto that before we leave you this afternoon. Katie, let me come back to you, because those trains, people will have planned far in advance for lots of their journeys. What about refunds on advanced train tickets, asks Richard in Wells.
Yeah, if you've already got a ticket, you've paid for it, you've planned to travel, and you choose not to travel, or perhaps that train is no longer running, yeah, you should be able to get a refund. Or if you want to use that ticket another day, like next week, that should be possible. Just double check the details with the train operator you got it from.
What about if it's just, the advice is don't travel, but that train is running?
Well, but they've said because they're advising only essential travel, if you choose not to travel on these days, yeah, you can have a refund or use it another day.
Okay, all right, that is good to know. Esme, you're back up now, because Rob in London has got a question that I think it will be best for you, because this is saying many people will blame this extreme hot weather event on El Nino. The question carries on, but let's pause there and briefly explain what that is first of all.
So El Nino is a natural weather phenomenon. We get it every 2 to 7 years, and effectively it's a change in wind patterns. And what happens is it means out in the tropical Pacific, you get warm water moving further east and into the central areas. That releases more heat, and it changes our weather patterns globally. And we know that later in the year, we're potentially expecting temperatures to increase in Southeast Asia and Australia. Right now, for this heat wave, El Nino is not affecting this, so we know that's not the cause here.
Okay, so then how can you explain how climate change may well be contributing to the extreme heat we're experiencing at the moment?
So this particular weather event is being caused by an area of high pressure, which we call a heat dome, and effectively it's not moving away, so it's trapping the hot air below it, and that hot air is being heated by, we've got very long summer days at the moment, and with that compression also more heat is generated. But this is important. So climate change is warming basically the background temperature of our planet. So even though this is one particular weather pattern and event, it's basically increasing those temperatures even further. Now there is some research going into looking about whether these heat domes are going to be more frequent under climate change. We don't yet know that. But imagine just basically adding these types of weather event on what is already a warming world, and you're going to get more extreme temperatures. And climate scientists are saying if we look at the temperature records across Europe and the UK, they're not being broken by a little bit, they're being broken by quite a significant amount. And that's an indication really that climate change is playing a role here. And Europe is particularly vulnerable. It's the fastest warming continent on the planet. And so we are really going to see more severe heat waves and more frequently in years to come.
And while we're with you, Esme, Mark in Bicester says, I've read a lot about a climate change milestone called a wet bulb event, and is asking whether that is something that anywhere on Earth that is currently being experienced right now, and if it could be a reality in the UK at some point.
So a wet bulb measure is a measure of humidity. So the way they measure it, it's a bit like they do this mini science experiment. So what they do is they wrap a thermometer in a wet muslin cloth, and what happens is that water starts to evaporate in the heat. And when that happens, energy is used up in the air around it, and that drives down the temperature. And eventually, when all the water's evaporated and the air is saturated, so it's 100% humidity, the temperature stops dropping. And they use that measure to look at how humid the air is right now. And the reason that's important is going back earlier to James's point about evaporation and sweating, is that we want to know how easy it is to sweat. And the more humid it is, the more moisture there is in the air, the harder it is for us to sweat. And it's why this particular event is being so difficult for people, because not only is it really hot, but that wet bulb measure is particularly high at the moment, and that is a measure that's done all over the world, but right now a very humid heat wave.
Okay. Katie, another question for you from Jill, who, and I've had this question be asked a lot, especially because we've been covering temperatures in Europe, saying, why does everything seem to come to a grinding halt in this country when we do get extreme hot or cold temperatures?
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that everything just functions as normal in every other country when they get extreme heat. I think every country maybe has a level of heat they're used to and everything is set up for. And then when we get these really big spikes like this week, I mean, we're talking about record temperatures for the time of year, aren't we? So that just means that things simply aren't quite geared up for that level of temperature, really. And I mean, the trains are one good example of that, where the tracks are actually engineered to withstand a certain temperature that is chosen because of our normal temperatures in this country, and it's kind of stress tested to a certain temperature. So, and they get a lot hotter than the air, remember, because this is metal, it's got trains running over it, it's in the sun, and so yeah, they can simply not really withstand that beyond a certain level and might start to kind of stretch and buckle, and that gets really dangerous. But the argument is that if you then engineered them to much higher temperatures, well then you might lose some of the their ability to cope at the lower end. So that it's kind of deliberate that they're engineered to cope with the temperatures we'd normally have, and in other countries where they're used to it being hotter than here, they will engineer them to a slightly higher temperature, if that makes sense. So like simply put, no, we're not really set up for these kind of extremes at the moment, and it's sometimes quite hard to adjust everything to cope with that new normal. But there's loads of work going on with all the agencies who look after the trains, the roads, all the rest of it, to try and adapt and try and make sure that things are as robust as possible in the face of this new reality we've got. There's a bit of a game of catch up, really, and like roads, for example, there was chat a few years ago about whether road surfaces would melt. I don't think realistically that's something we're seeing, but there'll be work to try and make sure that the surfacing of the roads is as up to date as possible, can withstand as much as possible. So yeah, a bit of a game of catch up, I think it's fair to say.
The Scottish Borders Council I saw were out with the gritters to actually try and make the surface of the road a little bit firmer and withstand those temperatures a little bit better. Can I actually briefly bring you back in here, Esme, because the question around climate change falls into a few categories, but preparedness for the impact of climate change is one of them. How would you summarise the UK's position when it comes to that?
The UK's independent climate advisors, the UK Climate Change Committee, look at this on a regular basis. The last report we got from them a few weeks ago, I'll be honest, the language wasn't great. They said the government's approach to this has been woeful. They particularly pointed out issues around our housing. They said it's really poorly adapted. It might come as a shock for anyone who's living outside the UK, but actually only 5% roughly of our homes has any air conditioning. a lot of our homes are designed to do passive cooling measures, so that's things like you don't have to take any action effectively, so your windows might be shaded, things like that. But what the committee said is in future we're going to have to consider installing more of that. We have changed our regulations recently, so there were some years about sort of in the early 21st century where we were building all these big skyscrapers with lots of glass that people were living in. They were acting like greenhouses and they really weren't working, so now we've reduced a lot of that glass. But they've also pointed out there's big problems with our old aging infrastructure, so schools and hospitals. You know, we've already had notices today from NHS Trust that just certain services they normally like to deliver aren't working because that aging infrastructure is really struggling. So the take of scientists really is that the government is not doing well. They're saying that they are taking this seriously, they're trying to invest more money in it, but I think some people that have been struggling in the heat this week and seeing lots of their trains cancelled probably would argue that's not what they're experiencing.
And just quickly, Katie, I mean, is there any sign of air conditioning becoming compulsory or part of new builds or public transport?
Well, I don't think it's compulsory per se. Do you know what? I actually asked the Department for Transport for this, and I'll actually check exactly what they said because I don't want to
This is good live journalism. Shall I come back to you?
You can. It won't take me a second.
Okay.
I just, peek behind the curtain. I didn't manage to print this off. But basically, the government broadly expects operators and transport authorities to try and make sure the working conditions are suitable. The working conditions are suitable for drivers and staff, and the Department for Transport would say all new trains rolled out by publicly owned operators, they say are 100% air conditioned, and some others already have 100% air conditioned fleets. I don't think anyone's trying to pretend here that air conditioning is always working 100% well on trains. I've been on some this week that it definitely hasn't been. But yeah, I think people realise it's something that we should be aiming for, and there are some efforts to make sure that new stock does have the best facilities possible in that regard.
Okay, all right. James, these hot nights are proving tricky for all of us. A question here from Jan in Southampton saying, how do you keep a 12-week-old baby cool, especially at night when we're told to keep the temperature low in the bedroom? Curtains were closed all day, but it was still 27 degrees at 7 o'clock last night. So what else to do?
I mean, it is a really difficult one. I'm navigating the same problems. I've got 3 children at home as well, trying to keep everything nice and cool for them. The first thing that I would say is that you need to try to manage the temperature of the house, not just at bedtime, but through 24 hours of the day during a heat wave. And you're going to love my props department. Here is, I have repurposed a meat thermometer for recording temperature, so it's 31 degrees outside at the moment. It's actually cooler inside my house. So at the moment, and that's because I've got all the windows shut, all the curtains shut as well. And so I'm trying to keep it cool. And then when the temperature flips, when it's cooler outside than it is inside, I'm going to throw open all of the windows and let the air breathe through the house and bring the temperature back down. So you need to really think about that 24-hour management of the temperature of the house, not just at bedtime. One of the tips that you can do is try to move everything downstairs. Now, with older children, that could be as simple as just grabbing a mattress and sticking it in the living room or on the kitchen floor if you've got enough space for them to just sleep on there, or bringing a baby's cot downstairs, because heat rises, it's basic physics. So if you have a downstairs, now many people who live in a flat won't be able to do this, but if you can move downstairs, that is an easy option for, just bring it down by a couple of degrees. But we have to accept that, if it is a really hot and sticky night and you don't have air conditioning, we're all going to have to cope with that. So don't layer up the baby in, a vest and a sleep suit and a blanket. Sometimes just a nappy is fine. You don't want to be blowing a fan on their body directly all night long, because that could lead to dehydration. So you also need to think about keeping baby nice and hydrated as well. But I appreciate it's going to be tough. I mean, it's tough for everyone.
I was looking at my sleep stats from last night, James, and they didn't make for good reading. I think I got about 5 hours. I don't know about you guys, but what struck me was that so much of it was light sleep as well. Is there any kind of science that points to the impact that is having on all of us in the daytimes when you have consecutive really hot nights?
Well, if you have disrupted sleep, and I don't want to make any judgments, I'll leave that to your colleagues in the office, Priya, but it tends to make you a miserable, grumpy person the next day. And that's one of the immediate mental, cognitive impacts that it has, because you need good restorative sleep. And if you don't get it, it has an impact on the way that your brain functions. You tend to have less attention, you tend to be more emotional, and you tend towards like junk food eating and things like that. So it has that impact. But one of the other issues is, if you're not getting that restorative sleep, is it does mount up the physical toll that it takes on the body over time. So if we think about a heat wave as a whole, you are putting your body through quite a physiological strain as you go through a heat wave. So your body wants to keep its core body temperature fixed at about 37 degrees. And in the heat, it's having to work really hard in order to keep your internal organs, your core body temperature, at that temperature. So in order to dissipate that heat, all the blood vessels open up all around your body. You're sweating constantly. It's that evaporation that cools you off. But in order for you to do that, your heart has to work harder to pump blood to all of those blood vessels on the surface of your skin. So you're constantly working harder. And if it gets cool, nice and cool over at night, it gives your body a literal breather. And so if you get this intensity during the day and during the night, and then the next day, and then the next night, and then the next day, that is when the cumulative pressure can mount up. Now, most of us will be completely fine, as long as you're doing the sensible stuff, you're hydrating, you're not overheating, you're staying out of the sun in the middle of the day, you'll be fine. But for people who are vulnerable, and that includes the elderly, the very young, people with other medical conditions, that extra physical strain on the body will be too much.
Okay. That is good to unpack some of that, but hopefully I haven't been grumpy today. Esme, I've got a question here from Kathy in Telford, saying that she seems to remember when she was growing up in the 90s and noughties being told the hottest point of the day was the middle of the day, but actually now we're being told peak temperatures are around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Is that something that has changed, and if so, why?
So the amount of heat that we're getting, we've got longer days in summer effectively, right? It doesn't get dark until 10. So if you think about it, the middle of the day is technically a little bit later. It's also about the amount of heat that's built up over the day. So we talk about trains suffering. That's because a lot of materials, basically concrete on the floor, metals, are absorbing a lot of heat throughout the day, and then it's re-emitting it back out. And so that heat can actually end up lasting well later into the afternoon. And so over the last couple of days, we've seen records start to be broken sort of around lunchtime, but then be broken consecutively throughout the afternoon. What has changed quite considerably, probably since she remembers, being younger, was those record temperatures. So it was quite unusual actually to get temperatures over 35 degrees in the 20th century. The last 6 out of 10 summers, we've seen that temperature reached, and it's only going to get worse. We've seen the Met Office earlier this week look at what the temperature might be like in 2056. If you've got young children now, we spoke there about babies suffering in the heat, they'll be in their sort of 20s and 30s. They could see temperatures closer to 45 or 47 degrees, and so that will make it considerably hard for people to cope, particularly under the adaptation of our infrastructure that we're seeing at the moment. So certainly temperatures are getting hotter, that heat is remaining throughout the kind of afternoon, and as we've heard there from James, those temperatures aren't dropping at night as much as we would like to see, which also affects our ability to cope.
Tom in Bristol, I know you had a question on just that, so hopefully Esme's answered that for you. One here though, and we're getting towards the end, so let's try and squeeze this in, Esme, from Robert, who says, will this hot weather maintain now through the summer? Because a lot of the commentary has been how this is quite early in the summer for these temperatures.
Exactly, we've had 2 heat waves in June. To get this many this early is unexpected. The Met Office has already extended the red alert, particularly for London, the southeast, into Friday, so that's longer than we thought. Other parts of the country we are expecting to see a break, and actually this heat dome that I've mentioned, it's moving further east across Europe, so eventually that will bring the temperatures down. Will we get more heat waves the rest of this summer? We can't predict that far out, it's quite difficult. What I can say is we will get likely more frequent, more severe heat waves over the coming years. That is down to climate change.
And would you say that it could happen at this time, at this earliness in the summer?
Yes, potentially, and that's because, as I mentioned, the global average temperature is rising, which means we get this sort of bell curve, which is where the most severe ends, those most severe temperatures are basically shifting, which means we can get them earlier, we can get them for longer, we can get them more severe. So we are already seeing earlier springs, which affect how wildlife perform. All the seasons are shifting, getting warmer, but also, not to mention, our winters are changing as well. They're becoming much wetter. So the typical British weather that we're used to and in the 20th century, that's not going to be the same moving forward.
Okay. Well, Esme Stallard, our climate reporter, thank you very much. James Gallagher, our health and science correspondent, and his props cupboard, thank you very much. And Katie Austin, thank you very much for joining us here in our studio as our transport correspondent. As I say, do keep yourselves safe in these high temperatures. The Met Office has extended its red warning for extreme heat into Friday for the southeast of England. Amber and yellow warnings elsewhere as well. Coverage is continuing live on the BBC News website. But from myself, Priya, thank you very much for joining us.